Welcome back, Venturers. I am Amar, and today with Taurus, we're going to tell you all what we've been up to in VN's past month. Well, we tried to structure this episode somewhat, and by the process of elimination, Taurus, you start.
Yeah, that's really clever of you, MR, to sleep into a little pun like that. What's wrong? You couldn't get your title in that? It's pretty easy to make a pun with process of elimination, but once some Japanese gets involved, oh, now it's too much a challenge. Oh, is that how it goes, MR?
Don't deflect, just talk.
Alright, yeah, I'm kidding. Because yes, last month I was reading a Nintendo Switch title called Process of Elimination. A mass murderer is on the loose. Live streaming his killing game show for entertainment, the Quartering Duke is the #1 target of the Detectives Alliance, who are buckling down once and for all to bring him to justice. Our main character here is an aspiring detective. He gets invited to join other top-of-the-world detectives in this investigation to take down the Quartering Duke, but things aren't that simple, and of course, a whole lot of mystery and investigations and murders take place. One thing that really drew me to Process of Elimination was its gameplay aspect. I would say this is a visual novel, but it does have segments involving gameplay. It's very cool because it's stylized like on a grid, like an RPG. You look at the whole map and you can see a whole bunch of objectives, such as where you can find evidence. You have options to where you can use your stats to analyze these clues for information, and then there's also points where you have to gather your detectives under your control to make deductions about the case. I personally think that murder mystery stories have their weakest segments during the investigation portions, where you're just going around poking for clues, trying to figure out how things went about. And I think this whole clue finding process is greatly enhanced by having these little gameplay segments. It really feels like you're physically putting the pieces together. And when you have a time limit, and when you see all of these characters under your control that are, displayed in their uniqueness from their stats and their abilities, it makes you feel like you're also working as a team, where you're the leader and you have a bunch of people who you are using to their best fit of what their strengths lie in. There's a time limit too to all of these sections, and it was never pressing, so I usually had plenty of time to figure it out, but still, there is that pressure on you to try and figure things out optimally and move your pieces around and who gets delegated to what tasks and what action they should be taking. I really thought this little gameplay segment was a huge hook in favor for Process of Elimination.
I mean, the first question that comes to my mind, since you mentioned how gathering clues as a gameplay segment grants you that feedback loop of you need to find them, and once you find them, they go into the story, and then based upon them, those clues that you found, you probably need to follow that through to more clues, because obviously the first ones won't give you the answer. So from one clue you go to the another, and that creates a feedback loop.
Exactly. As you find clues and as you investigate them, new clues will pop up on the board.
Yeah.
So as you investigate something and you realize, hey, wait a second, like this bathroom should be an integral part of the case then, right? And then it's like poof, and now there's a segment in the little bathroom section. Obviously sometimes this is a bad thing in video games because, you want your whole board to be laid out ahead of time. You don't want to get surprised and, the whole thing goes up in flames because you have people in the wrong spots. But it's not that big a deal in Process of Elimination.
But I was going to make a point. Do you feel like this kind of system enhances the experience from the immersion standpoint or keeping you gripped?
Immersion standpoint, I'm never really, a fan of or really considerate of how immersive a work is.
Okay.
I always tend to just enjoy the stories for what they are. I do think it made these segments more gripping, though. Obviously, I think back to other titles like Danganronpa or Ace Attorney, and I think back to what their investigative sections are like, where you're wandering around from location to location, you talk to people, you poke around at the environment to find clues. And like I mentioned, I always felt those were the weakest parts. And so when you have process of elimination, in which they make it so much more hands-on with that dash of gameplay for you to directly, farm up these results yourself, I do think that was a benefit, yeah.
Now, another part that speaks to me when you were describing is the fact that that was a team effort. And the team you worked with were all bona fide investigators instead of, the random collection of high schoolers, as it typically tends to be, right?
Yes.
But for better or worse, you had a specialist now. And obviously, I know anime, I know how the specialists are portrayed. I assume there will be some archetypes of how those investigators have their own style of coming up, deducing, or approaching crime scene, right? Is that true?
Yes, the characters. Process of elimination, I'll say it now, one of my biggest problems with it was how empty it felt. It had a few good premises, and there were some aspects of it I liked, but overall it was just very lacking any real substance in many different ways, and one of which was its characters. You have a whole group of people who are detectives, like you mentioned, and they all have their very specialized knowledge and vaguely supernatural abilities. Yeah, you have someone like, and they all go by code names too. So there's Bookworm Detective, who has a photographic memory. You have like Techie Detective, who loves his devices and is capable of, making new things at the snap of his fingers. You have like Mystic Detective, who is well versed in the occult. And so this is a good start, but then they all feel so anime, where all of the characters tend to come across as one note, and you don't really get that deeper dive into them that would really flesh out the story.
So you feel like it's not like those characters aren't characterized in a style of, listen, this is me and this is my gimmick, but rather, I am the gimmick.
Yes, I am the gimmick, and that is it. And like the VN tries to layer on some more background and some more depth to them, but it comes across as very artificial, and it doesn't really affect the plot in much ways. There were a few times someone had that big, backstory reveal of like, well, actually, I'm also blah, blah, blah from this blah, blah, blah agency tasked with blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, that has nothing to do with anything. And then, like 10 seconds later, the story just doesn't care and it moves on. So, again, you had these cool characters, and I feel like they didn't get the attention they deserved. Even though, a lot of their premises were pretty cool. And they had some interactions that were very cool. But again, it's also a very surface layer. It's the same thing for a lot of the cases as well. I mentioned that the investigative portions are generally my weakest parts. And anyone who's read murder mystery stories know that the best parts are leading up to the results. It's the whole analysis, and like in Danganronpa, it's the class trials where everyone's throwing out their theories and you get step by step closer to the truth. Or like Ace Attorney, where now you're in court and you have witnesses and you got to refute their testimonies and present your evidence. Those are the best parts. Those are the exciting moments. And in process of elimination, these murder cases are only like 2 steps deep. You end up blazing through these investigative parts to determine who the killer is in like 10-15 minutes.
Oh.
I was like, what gives, man? Even late in the game, like chapter 5, it's like, oh wow, this case looks real juicy and complex, and there's several different directions this could go. And I'm like, I'm playing the gameplay part and going through all the clues, and we're trying to make some deductions. I'm like, oh, we're setting the table up for something good here. And then again, it was just over in like 10 minutes. I'm like, are you serious? No.
Oh.
So instead, you have this VN where process of elimination is supposed to be about these detective-ing cases, and instead, you spend a lot of the time either just in downtime of them talking with each other, or traveling from one location to another, or going off on like some character introspection that doesn't really matter. And it's even worse, it's not even about the quartering Duke. You know, the big old mastermind that they're all gathered here to investigate. It's like we get halfway through, and I have no clue how any of this relates to the quartering Duke stuff. It's just them dealing with emergencies and having to bounce from that to another. And like I said, we get halfway through, we finally found a scrap of info about the quartering Duke, and I was like, whoa, what? I did a double take. I'm like, oh yeah, that's what this story's supposed to be about, right?
Oh, dang.
I think, Master Detective Archives Operation Raincode, that other Switch game, that VN also had the same problem, where you got halfway through and you're thinking, when are we gonna get to the big picture? Ay.
And if I remember correctly, that title also had a problem with its cast. That didn't have enough time in the spotlight, right?
Right? Raincode, I feel like Raincode unnecessarily carved itself up and separated a lot of important things, including the cast members to themselves. Which obviously that's a problem in its own right. Whereas with process of elimination, the bigger problem is just that they had all these opportunities and they just didn't take the chance to ever develop the characters.
I see. Now, funny enough, I have a question, because you mentioned that there is the quartering Duke and there's one big case you need to solve and finally get him.
Mm-hmm.
The dastardly villain, right?
Mm-hmm.
Would that kind of story, with that kind of setup and a team of investigators, would benefit from a series of smaller cases that all coalesce into bigger one? Because from what I gathered, you talk about there's one case and you solve only one case, instead of, I don't know, series of smaller ones that have one bigger story to solve.
Mm-hmm. Honestly, that's the obvious solution. You have this mastermind who keeps, live streaming his, sick deaths that he puts on. And then as you investigated each one and you find more clues and you learn more about the quartering Duke, as while you're trying to stop the clock, and he keeps killing more people, and everyone's like, no, we let this happen again. And it's like, well, we're getting one step closer. Soon we'll bring him to justice. If it was that sort of thing, that's the obvious way to handle it. And with every case, you get closer and closer. Instead, that whole setup is just part of the backstory in this VN.
Oh.
And there's a few, kind of leaps of logic and a few butt pulls, if you know what I mean, to keep things related to everything else, and it's not nearly as engaging.
Hey, that's so weird. I mean, it's obvious because that's the first thing that comes to my mind. Split it into smaller cases and then connect it all in the big picture. And for the big picture to be solved, put some breadcrumbs in all of those smaller ones.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably the most typical setup I've seen. And whenever you mention a murder mystery that has that kind of setup, smaller cases that at the end will all connect to each other. I tend to go back to Nairo Reincarnation. That was the murder mystery with supernatural elements. I really like that because of that. You had those smaller cases. You gathered your team of yokais that were your investigation team, and then you go to town, or in this case, small village.
That sounds cool. Especially with and that's the sort of thing that's far more styled like a traditional VN, right?
Yeah. It didn't have any gameplay portions.
Hey, maybe I'll check it out or something. But yeah, as far as process of elimination goes, I ended up leaving very disappointed. Not because it did anything particularly bad, but because it left so much potential on the table, and instead of the cool things it did, which there were a few, I remember it more for just kind of lacking any real substance.
Man, I think this always pays the most when you see the potential and what could have been. Because if you wouldn't see that, right? You could just chalk it in like, but VN move on, or forgettable move on. But the moment you see the potential and how it could have been great, it pains. It pains.
It's not, I mean, I wouldn't say it's not as serious as a few other titles I've read in the past, which infuriated me with all the potential they showed and just the few things they did to tear it all down. It's more so like process of elimination just has the nice premise, and just everything about the execution feels a little subpar.
Auros, I believe in you. There will be a Readport that you will come in and say you're satisfied.
I know, I've been on a pretty bad streak lately. I've read a lot of titles that have left me vaguely disappointed.
And I can't help but notice none of them were Evenico. So, I'm just saying.
Yeah.
I'm just saying.
Yeah, and I'm keeping away from that because I disappoint you. It's gonna be another one in the streak of disappointments.
Oh, dang. True. You cannot read it on this streak. True.
Well, what have you been up to, MR? What have you been reading?
Oh, okay. So, I also had a weird streak of nostalgia this time because I've read, or at least I'm reading because I haven't finished, Mashiro Iro Symphony. Oh boy. It is very nostalgic title for me because, okay, let's first talk about the title itself. It's a story about a high school boy going over a typical high school life. Well, not really. The setup for this title is more similar to Princess Evangel, a guy put into an all-girls school. But unlike Princess Evangel, he's not alone. The private all-girls school has a merger with a regular school, and now you witness the first term starting with classes consisting of mix of boys and girls. What this creates is the divide between the girls that came from that school and had those school grounds excluded for themselves, and the newcomers, especially unwelcoming to the boys, also quite cold towards the girls that came from the regular school. Now, somehow, amidst that hostility, probably mostly due to the fact that the protagonist is a friend of the student council president, you are in the midst of mending that relationship, of bridging the gap between that cold, unwelcoming reception and the new school year. Oh, and it is very important that it features the best green-haired maid ever. So, it's important.
I love how you had this typical high school story sort of premise, and you snuck in a green-haired maid. Okay.
Yeah, obviously, because listen, it has a very unique feel. You read the title. It's sometimes uplifting. Oh, look at this grandiose luxury high school, cool. And then you meet the reception that is very cold and detached, and then you slouch in your high school desk like, oh, well, I really survived this high school year. And then you think, and then in the midst of the classroom you get bam, a mate in your face. Do you want some tea? I'm like, what the hell is happening? This game keeps you on your toes, I tell you. She is the best. Oh my god, she is such a bundle of happiness and randomness.
Aw. But yeah, you mentioned this was a nostalgic title. Why is that?
Ha ha ha. The original, and maybe about the releases first, because it first released in 2009. Okay.
Oh wow.
It got an anime adaptation in 2011, and that was around that time when I watched it, the anime version, and it marks one of the first anime I spoke with random people on the internet about very passionately, right? And bonded with my friends over, right? So it's very nostalgic. It has that special place in my heart. And it got a remake. Released recently in May this year. So I am on it.
Wow.
As long as I finish all the other things in the backlog and it became #1, I was like, go. Amatsu Tsumi is done. Amatsu Tsumi is behind me. Let's go. Next one.
Okay, so how far are you in it?
It's hard to say because I'm still on the common route. So I think it's 5 hours or so.
Okay.
So
and
I haven't yet encountered any kind of choices.
And is it living up to your wild nostalgia glasses?
Listen, you know how in the past I described titles with deep lore and references to historical figures or historical artifacts, like some sort of legendary weapon. I stop, I open Wikipedia, and I Google what is this? With this title, sometimes when I see a particular scene, I'm like, wait a moment, I recognize it. I stop the VN, I open my endless folder of screenshots, and I find the screenshots from the anime. I'm like, yes, I remember that thing, that it happened. It doesn't help. It makes me stop way too often, okay? Yeah, somehow, throughout these years, I remember those scenes from the anime, and it's quite weird feeling to read the VN for the first time and I recognize those situations. Like, oh wait a moment, I know that hole. I remember what will happen. It's really something.
Oh,
It's
that's pretty
also,
sweet.
yeah, it's also intriguing how, and I mentioned the streak before. This is the third title recently that I've read that is from Palette developer. First title I read from them, from the end, is Saku Saku Love Blooms with the Cherry Blossoms. It was a love story with a lot of supernatural, Grim Reapers, and something like that. That was the first title from Palette that I've read. And after that, which is super hilarious to add to this collection, okay? But it's still Palette. This is the same developer. It's 9-9. It's also their work. Like, holy hell. And with each of their titles, I've left satisfied. For different reasons, because they are not similar to each other. But yeah.
Do you see any comparisons between, say, Shiroiroi and 9-9?
Do you mean like art style or genre?
Anything, to be
or
honest.
Themes?
Sure.
The art style is probably the most striking resemblance. That's yeah, I see that. Definitely. Themes, no. It's so far departed of how intense 9-9 was compared to this. The worst you can get is cold stairs. And in a way, 9-9 was very serious from the first episode with the murder mystery and the life or death situation you got put into. And here the worst the protagonist encounter is like he was trying so hard, thinking of a way to solve how to mend those two factions together, that he by mistake ventured into the toilet and forgot that it was all girls' schools before, so the toilet wasn't for men. And you know what kind of situation that it entails, right?
Haha, classic.
The classic. You know, that's not the same kind of drama that 9-9 had when there were people turning into stones.
Okay, so yeah, and I mean, I take it with this VN, you have the typical high school, everyday moege, some bits of character drama kind of story, or at least that's what you've seen so far.
So far, yes. Yeah, the how can we say it? The biggest mystery so far is what is that creature? I don't know. Palette likes to introduce some sort of weird, undescribable pet, and they have one here as well. Okay, it is something that looks like a cat, dog, hybrid something, and everybody reacts like that. Like, oh, this is just a creature that is a mascot of this series, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and now for the most important question, though.
Oh, come on, give it to me. I know where you this is good. Come on.
What's your plan for tackling these routes? Are you following a guide, or are you going straight for best girl first?
I never had a pattern of how to approach that, and I definitely avoid any kind of guides, so I will not be doing any kind of recommended order and whatnot. I don't know. I'll be honest. I will be either first going onto Anj and just to clear the confusion, that the name of the maid is Anj, not to confuse with a certain YouTuber, okay? So I would probably start with her route, or maybe leave her for the last. I don't know. Haven't decided yet.
Okay, you're just gonna let your heart carry you along?
Yeah, I did not have pattern for those kind
Alright.
of picks, so
Yeah, that's admirable.
I don't know. I'll see where I land.
And depending on how that goes, you gotta let us know next month what you think.
Oh yeah. You.
Haha.
Yeah.
Heck yeah.
I'm definitely getting an update from this title. Yeah.
Did you have a favorite back from when you first watched the anime?
Oh, this is so funny. For the background images that run, I put some screenshots from the anime. So for those who listen in, imagine that we have series of screenshots from the VN, and at some point it changes to the anime. Some of those are harder to recognize the switch because they look quite similar. I scoured quite a long time to find any screenshots that aren't the Anj screenshots. Okay, I may have a clear favorite, okay?
Oh, wow.
But to be fair to other characters, I scoured my folder really hard to find and give them some space as well, okay? And I may or may not be salty that she didn't win in the anime. I'm not saying.
Those poor other girls. Victims of MR favoritism.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Alright, yeah, anything else you want to say? Any last closing thoughts?
I'm having a blast in this title, and I have to say, editing, the image editing on this title is just impeccable. The fact to which length they went to translate the title, like you have CGs, right? That depict a conversation over a phone, a smartphone. more of a flip phone. Anyway, and all the menu items and the text messages are edited for English language. Like, that's crazy detailed. Holy crap. And it makes an impact, I have to say. It shows quality.
Sweet. Props to the image editing team.
Yeah, I am. Yeah, mad props. Mad props. It probably took a lot of effort to recreate a lot of those assets. They did a bang job. Like, impressed. I feel like whenever we brought that with Barry, when we talked about translations, we mentioned like this is probably not a requisite to get a translation, but it shows when it's done properly, and it is a lot of work. And I can't believe it. I sit here and I was floored the first time I saw how they recreated everything, even to the extent of special effects. You know how you have a screen on a phone, and it's illuminated by light, and it reflects, has a reflection on those menu items that are recreated buttons with an English text on it.
Ooh.
Perfect. I'm like, wow. It wasn't easy. Holy crap.
Ooh, impressive.
Yeah. And obviously, since this title features sprites that rotate and you see the back of their character, so they get a +1 from me, okay? I'll say it.
That's a mark of quality.
Exactly. if characters rotate and have back sprites, it's a quality +1.
All right. Thanks for that, MR. And those are both the titles we read this past month, and that's what's been keeping us busy. Hopefully, all you listeners enjoyed. Thank you all very much for tuning in.
And see you next time. VNture out.
VNture out.